So let's start looking at the production. I'm going to be dividing this up a little bit. We're going to start by looking at the script and the plot, although in a later section we'll look at character, protagonist, themes, and visual elements. So let's start with the script. And the script is a written document containing the dialogue used by the actors. And there's a few things we can tell just from the script. For example, if we see everyday language, what's known as the vernacular, used, then what we're dealing with is everyday events, everyday truths, things that are easily relatable. Whereas if we see poetic language, it tends to indicate stronger symbolism. In other words, there's an abstract theme somewhere in the background that we're supposed to pay attention to. Now, in scripts, we also see monologues, which often give us the character's inner thoughts. It's basically the character telling us what's going on in their own mind. And this brings us to plot, because the script must follow a basic plot diagram. And this is a plot diagram that we've seen used in the West going back as far as the Greeks and probably further. So this is the structure or skeleton of the play. The dynamics of the play will rise in intensity until they reach a climax. Afterwards, they will relax into the resolution. And there's a point to this. So there's a couple of things I want to point out. You'll notice that the exposition is at the same level as the resolution. And you can read this as emotion over time. So here we have our emotional interest, and here we have time. And the plot wants to keep us at the same emotional point that we entered the theater when we leave the theater. Otherwise, we're going to be very uncomfortable. You don't want to be much, much happier when you leave, or much, much sadder or angrier. If that happens, we don't necessarily make the connection as to why we're feeling that emotional state, and therefore it makes us uncomfortable. Secondly, we follow this because this framework will take us on an emotional roller coaster, working us up to the point of the climax. If we had the climax too early, it wouldn't make sense. It would be very disappointing. And this is where most of the story will take place, on this build-up between the conflict and the climax. So let's start with the exposition. This provides background information for the play, the book, the movie, the TV show, whatever it happens to be. And here we introduce characters, their personalities, relationships, background, and situation. And we can all think of movies, for example, maybe even plays, where there wasn't enough exposition, or maybe there was too much exposition and we lost out on everything else. The exposition tends to be a little bit dull. This is the slow start, but it's necessary information. And depending on where the playwright takes up the story, we will also see at the end of the exposition the point of attack, or the complication. Now, the complication is basically rising action. So at a specific moment, an action or decision will be made which upsets the current state of affairs. This is the inciting incident. So at some point early on, there must be something that happens that changes things, that sends the hero on their journey, or whatever the situation may be. This starts the complication. And the complication is basically the meat of the play. It's comprised of a series of conflicts or decisions called crises. And you'll notice it acts in steps. That's very intentional. So we have points where we have a lot of conflict going on, and points where there's very little conflict, and we kind of go back and forth as we work up to the eventual climax. And this rise in intensity must happen really in a scale that we understand. As humans, we like things that take about an hour to 2 hours to get there. We're going to go through these peaks and valleys until we get to the point where we're destroying the giant moon base with a starship. Or we have emo Kylo Ren or emo Darth Vader who's about to fight our two protagonists, whatever the case may be. Now, the climax must happen towards the end of the film. We don't want to spend half the film going through a resolution. That is also one of the issues we run into with a trilogy, where we have an individual plot model for each movie, but also we have to go through an overarching plot model, which can oftentimes make the end of the third movie very, very difficult. Then we have the resolution. This is the final resolution of the plot. Basically, we're tying up loose ends. We're trying to figure out what happens at the end of the play or the movie. And the exposition, the complication, and the resolution will comprise the time frame of the play. We need this resolution because this brings us down from that emotional height of the climax down to the point where we were when we entered the theater, so that we don't leave uncomfortable. Because if we do, then we're not going to return to the movie or play again.